Okay, my name's Tristan Kay. I'm at the University of Bristol in the UK.
And I'm Elena Lombardi. I'm at Oxford in the UK as well.
And Elena and I are going to be talking about Canto 26 of Dante's Purgatorio. Just to establish very quickly where we are in the poem, we're on the last terrace of Purgatory here that is dedicated to one of the 7 deadly sins. And in this case, it's the sin of lust. And as we know from the Inferno, from Canto 5 of the Inferno, lust is a really complex and challenging sin for Dante because of his own history as a love poet. It's a sin where we see a great sense of sort of personal involvement. And this canto offers naturally a really rich meditation on questions of love and lust, including some intriguing echoes of that Canto 5 of the Inferno that Elena is going to talk about in a second. But it also has a really strong focus on love poetry and poetic tradition as well as on the sin of lust itself. And indeed, the 2 characters with whom Dante converses here are both love poets, Guido Guinizelli and Anna Daniel. Elena, do you want to sort of begin by placing this in some sort of context for us, this canto?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to say very briefly, Tristan, that it's really a pleasure to do this with you, especially in these, really strange times, to do this with a friend, that with someone whose work has really intertwined with mine for so many years and has inspired my work as well. We both have worked extensively on love and desire in Dante. And so it's great to talk about Purgatorio 26. Purgatorio 26 and the sin of lust. As you mentioned, this is a really extraordinary episode, especially when we look at it in the mirror of the other great episode of lust in Inferno 5, the Canto Francesca da Rimini, one of the most famous episodes of the Inferno, because Purgatorio 26 is and is not Inferno 5. There are some very subtle yet really striking details that connect Inferno 5 to Purgatorio 26, and there are also very many differences. And I would like to approach the canto precisely through these similarities and differences. The biggest, one of the biggest similarities is, of course, il bacio, the kiss. The kiss is central to Francesca's episode, and here there is a kiss itself that becomes part of the very contrapasso. Like the one of Inferno 5, strikingly, it is a kiss of the mouth, but it is much more hurried and friendly than the one we have seen before. It is compared to the kiss that 2 ranks of ants, of formiche, exchange when they meet. Is a way of checking each other out, of saying hello. And if you don't mind, I will read these lines. These are lines 31 to 35 in Purgatorio 26. Li veggio d'ogni farsi presta ciascun'ombra e basciarsi una con una senza restar. Contenta a breve festa. Così per entro loro schiera bruna s'ammusa l'un con l'altra la formica. Forse a spiar lor via e lor fortuna. So after this very interesting kiss, and after exchanging some words, the 2 ranks, l'una e l'altra schiera of sinners, part ways. And here we have yet another image from Inferno 5, the image of the cranes. If you remember, back then the cranes were part of the triple bird simile that introduced the damned in the circle. Here it's the other place where the crane appear, and here are 2 ranks of cranes who trace opposite direction. One is seen to aim for the warm and the other for the cold weather. These are lines 43 and following. Poi come al grue che le montagne riffe volasser parte e parten ver le arene, queste del gel, quelle del sole schife, l'una gente se ne va, l'altra sen vene e tornan lagrimando ai primi canti. So the mechanics of this canto is that we have two ranks that meet, exchange word, kiss, and then go in opposite direction. And we shall see in a minute who these ranks are. Because I want to pause 1 second on a detail, the last detail that connects in a really interesting way Purgatorio 26 to Canto 5. And it is a rhyme, a rima equivoca, so a rhyme of two words that sound the same but don't mean the same thing. And in this case, the rhyme is between legge, the law, and legge, reads or is read or to read. So let's actually listen to this rhyme here in lines 82 and following. Nostro peccato fu ermafrodito, ma perché non servammo umana legge, seguendo come bestie l'appetito, in obbrobrio di noi per noi si legge, quando partinci il nome di colei che si imbestiò nelle imbestiate schegge. Now, readers of Inferno 5 will remember that this rhyme in Inferno 5 binds really a figure of a very powerful, proud female singer, the first singer and female that we see in Hell, Semiramis, di cui si legge che a vizio di lussuria fu sì corrotta che libido felicito in sua legge. So we have these strange rhymes that echo from Semiramidi here to another rather powerful and formidable queen, Pasiphae. Two powerful queens bound together by a rhyme that brings together reading and the law, which reminds us that these two cantos are very much about reading, about writing the written word, the norm, sexual and otherwise, sexual, poetic and otherwise, and of course they are about stories and their interpretations. Back to the two ranks to see how different actually this is also from Inferno 5. The two ranks, who are these people? Well, while back in Hell, heterosexual and homosexual lust were conceived as two different things, two different sins. Lust among the sins of passion, and homosexuality, sodomy, as it was called, among the sins of violence. So they were punished in two very different ways, but they were really set apart. Here, they are simply presented as two declensions of the sin of lust. And this is very interesting, and it has raised many debates about Dante's position on homosexuality. Importantly, also Dante reflects on the sin of lust. This is something that he had not done back in Inferno. In Inferno, he took the circle of lust as a way of surprising his readers and writing this very pensive, very delicate reflection on love and love poetry. Here the sin of lust is presented in a rather straightforward, almost exaggerated way, especially insofar as heterosexual lust is represented. Because if we see this in the examples that the two ranks yell each other. So where the gay rank yells out the example of Sodom and Gomorrah and is recalled through the scene of Caesar. So a very powerful, a very important figure of leader in the Middle Ages. The straight ranks are exemplified by the rather horrendous story of Pasiphae, queen of Crete, who is taken by a mad desire for a bull, manages to have sex with it, and has even an offspring, which is the Minotaur, the half man and half bull creature that we have seen in hell. So she is guilty of bestiality, which in the theology of the time didn't even compute as a form of homosexual lust. It was really by far considered the worst manifestation of the sin. So where we had love and love poetry, here we have bestiality. But the interesting thing is that it is a poet talking about bestiality. So while Inferno 5 is this ambiguous and inextricable mix of love, lust, and love poetry, here it seems to me that Dante puts all the ingredients in front of us readers in a very bold, very extreme way, and asks us for some kind of creative reflection on it, especially insofar the poets are concerned. And of course, you have written and taught a lot about this. So to you, Tristan.
Thanks, Elena. Yeah, that was great and helps us, I think, to see the bigger picture here, both in Dante's own culture, but also kind of some of the echoes and parallels within the Commedia itself. I just want to turn to the specific poets who are Dante's interlocutors in this canto. The first of these is Guido Guinizelli, who is really the dominant presence in this canto. He does the most talking. Guido was a 13th century lyric love poet from Bologna. He was born in about 1230, so about 35 years before Dante. And he was a profound influence on Dante's early love poetry, especially his some of the poetry compiled in his Vita Nova, where Dante describes him as il saggio, as the wise one. He places him really as a poetic authority in that work. Guido is often associated with his use of theological ideas and images in his love poetry. His depiction of the beloved as a donna angelicata, that is an angelified lady, if you like, and with it, love as a kind of spiritually enriching and edifying force. But here he is in Purgatory, we assume, on the terrace of the Lustful, on account of his love poetry. So he's not the spiritual or the apparent spiritual content of his love poetry is not foregrounded here. Rather, the suggestion is that his poetry was too focused on the carnal and not enough on the spiritual. And as Elena pointed out, Guido describes his sin as that of seguendo come bestie l'appetito, as following his appetite in a manner more characteristic of a beast than a human. And this is quite a dramatic reframing and recasting of that very refined lyric poetry which he once wrote. It's a very sort of moralistic language, as Elena says. And it's really the opposite of what we saw with Francesca. Francesca was in hell for lust, yet she described her sin in the refined language of love, and indeed including the language of Guido himself, with her reference to the noble heart, which is at the heart of one of Guido's most famous poems. So Guido is a former sinner, indeed we assume a poetic sinner, but Dante Pilgrim in lines 94 to 99 describes his urge to embrace him, not only to embrace him, but to embrace him as a father. 97 to 98, il padre mio e degli altri miei miglior, che mai rime d'amor usar dolci eleggiatre, the father to me and to others who always used love's sweet and graceful rhymes. So there's lots to unpack, isn't there, here? We see Dante's great poetic reverence here, his sense of affiliation, his regarding of Guido as a father figure, but simultaneously the failings of Guido as a poet, the fact he's here for seguendo come bestie l'appetito. It seems that Guido's poetic identity and activity now has to be left behind, but nonetheless, Dante has this urge to embrace him. And the fact that we see in line 100 onwards that Dante says that he is pensoso, sans udire e dir pensoso andai, lunga fiata rimirando lui. So there I was deep in thought. I went on without listening or speaking as I gazed at him. There's a sense here, I think, of Dante recognizing the need to reevaluate who Guido is as a man and as a poet. And as is quite typical of the Purgatorio, Guido isn't really very comfortable with this praise, this lavish praise from Dante, and he wants to deflect his compliments to someone else. And he says, frate, in line 115, brother, this poet that I'm pointing out to you, fu miglior fabbro del parlar materno, was either a finer or perhaps the finest craftsman of the mother tongue. And the fact that he says, soverchio tutti, in line 119, he overcame them all, he surpassed them all, suggests he probably means the finest of all. He's the preeminent writer in the medieval vernaculars, whether writing in poetry or in prose. And this person is Anna Daniel, a 12th century troubadour poet. He wrote in Provençal or Occitan. He was known for his technical skill, his innovation, but also for his intense poetic commitment to erotic love. And he was another poet like Guido who clearly inspires Dante earlier in his career. So this poet of worldly love and sort of carnal fixation, carnal obsession, is surprisingly celebrated here in Purgatory as the greatest writer in the vernacular. He's even given the honor of speaking in his own language of Occitan and not in Dante's native Florentine, like all the other sinners we witness here in Purgatory. But I'm interested in particular in the two comparisons that Guido makes here while talking about Anna Daniel. He says in 119 to 120 that Anna is superior to quel di Lemosy, that one from Limoges. And this is a poet called, another troubadour called Girard de Bornay. And he says Girard received this undeserved attention, this undeserved poetic glory. And similarly, there was a poet in Italy in 124 to 126, Guitone, who is named more explicitly, who received the praise and the lavish celebration of the antichi, the old-fashioned people. And this establishes a bit an opposition between the antico and the novo, because remember Dante 2 cantos earlier, Canto 24, had associated himself with the dolce stil novo, the sweet new style. Here, Guitone, by contrast, is the poet of the antichi. But what's quite surprising here is that both Girard and Guitone were moral poets. They used lyric poetry to tackle moral and ethical themes. And indeed, Guitone did so by rejecting love poetry very forcefully. So we might think this would be a good thing in Purgatory. We'd think they were the poets who were celebrated by Dante here. But it's in fact the love poets who are the ones who are celebrated at the same time as they are purged of that poetic identity. So this, I think, to sum up this section, is a canto characterized by tension between condemnation on the one hand and celebration on the other. Guido is this poetic father Dante wants to embrace. Arnau is the master craftsman who is given this privilege of speaking in his own language. And we should consider Dante here in the Commedia continues to attach value to love poetry. in spite of the problems associated with it. And it's love poetry that remains central to his journey to God. He doesn't reject love poetry, but it's through his love for Beatrice that his journey to God is realized. Love is something reformulated in the Commedia, and not, as in the poetry of Guitone, not something rejected. And just to conclude, I want to ask you, Elena, you've reflected a lot on this theme of love and lust and desire in Dante. Why do you think this is such an important facet of Dante's work? And also, why is there anything about this canto you think particularly resonates with us today as modern readers, or that's particularly intriguing to us today as readers in 2020?
Well, Tristan, yes. I think the importance on this canto, as you were saying, is precisely in the interesting commitment that Dante has to love poetry and to erotic love, in precisely what you have just said, and in the vernacular, because this canto ends with the largest allophone vernacular insertion on the comedy. Yeah. Dante allows Arnaud to talk in his own language, and so he opens up also that area of reflection for us. It's a very, very open canto that creates tensions and troubles with what Dante said before, but in a very exciting, productive way. And I suppose, and it's something that makes us reflect today, is change of direction, rather sharp, unannounced, uncommented upon, on homosexuality. I think it's a great lesson from Dante that not in the realm of damnation, but in the realm of salvation, it would put, homosexuals and heterosexuals together. It's just simply a matter of inclination. And they are absolutely equal. Actually, in a way, the homosexual rank, for the examples that they deal with, they seem a little bit more respectable than the heterosexual rank. But besides this, it's really an interesting stand that Dante takes, and that makes us think a lot about himself and his culture.
Yeah, and it shows, I guess, the passing of time, maybe an evolving reflection between the writing of the Inferno and Purgatorio. We see a very different take on that particular issue. So thanks very much, Elena. I think we should stop there, but it was great to talk about this canto with you.
Yes, thank you, Tristan. It was really wonderful.
And thank you for watching, anyone who has listened to this reflection on this canto. Thank you.
Thank you.